amazing Australians and the story of their lives. You're tuned to Lots to Chat About with Rosemary Peterswald.
Hello, listeners, and welcome once again. My guest today is Bridget Noble. In 2021, Bridget's husband John had a stroke, and as a result he was diagnosed with aphasia, meaning he had no alphabet, no numbers, no time, no understanding of his life or who he was. The only thing he could say was yes and smile. The stroke had affected the left-hand side of John's brain, leaving him with aphasia, a language disorder that affects a person's ability to express and understand written and spoken language, and some right-side mobility challenges. Determined to find out as much as she could about aphasia, Bridget made it her mission to find out what services were on offer to help John communicate again and what she could do to help him on that road. And in doing so, she has brought aphasia very much into the limelight, which will help many other sufferers cope with this affliction. Welcome, Bridget.
Thank you.
Now, Bridget, I believe you first met John on Hayman Island. You'd come to Australia as a Jillaroo, just 20, and John, who went to school at Churchie here in Brisbane, had a passion for sport, swimming, rugby, water polo and tennis, which he was playing right up until his stroke. Tell us more about that meeting. I believe you'd sailed up on a cruising boat from Sydney, is that right? And John was sailing boats for his Brisbane business, Noble's Marine. So you both have a love of the water.
We do. And I answered an ad in the paper in Sydney and luckily got myself a job as a crew on a yacht with a New Zealand skipper. And away we went out through Sydney Harbour Heads, not knowing who he was or where we were going other than sailing north to the Whitsundays.
Oh, how lovely. A terrific adventure. Which,
Absolutely.
Ended up in you meeting John. So you'd obviously lived together for many, many years before John had a stroke. Did you think he might have been a candidate for one? I mean, did he have high blood pressure, was overweight, smoked? I think you said he had a love of wine and chocolates, and despite playing tennis, may not have done as much exercise as he should, but even so.
We've talked about this, and yes, we had all the alerts. We had blood pressure, high blood pressure. We had LDL, cholesterol in a higher place than it should have been. He did do tennis, but it was only once a week, and he played very well. It was a hard game. But there was no other real exercise in between. And he loved chocolates, loved wine. It was a stroke that was probably preventable if he'd been able to be less indulgent in these excitements.
Right. And I believe he just fell out of bed, was it, one morning in bed, and you found him sort of on the ground?
Yes, it was 3:15 a.m. and I heard a thud and I woke up to find him on the ground, and I let him have a few seconds to sort of come around to what had happened and then asked him to get back on the bed, which he did, and then started to ask him questions, and there were fairly unusual answers, so I rang 000 straight away.
And how long was he in hospital?
We got him there at 4 a.m. and then he had a CT scan, thought that he could have a clot retrieval, which he was taken over to another hospital to have that done, and then they couldn't do it because it was actually a plaque rupture rather than a clot on its own. And so he was in hospital then, back at the original hospital for 2 months, and received a lot of rehabilitation there for occupational therapy, speech therapy, physiotherapy.
So I believe the clot was such that they had to let it go ahead and become a stroke. Was that right? That would have been terrifying. Yes.
The stroke was already there, but they had to let it, as they call it, complete, because they couldn't actually do a clot retrieval.
Right. So how did you, sort of cope then when he came home? I mean, suddenly your whole life has changed. Topsy-turvy, isn't it? Inside out.
In hospital it was already topsy-turvy. It's not a catastrophe of just one person. It's a catastrophe for the whole family, basically, but certainly the partner. And we were in business. We were both in business at a dual role of sales, and it was our own business. So we had to simply stop. And I became his full-time carer in the hospital as well, because there was no one else who was going to be visiting and doing. And John's condition was, because he'd forgotten everything and had to ultimately relearn everything, then it was a case of communication was a large challenge for all of us.
Did he know who you were?
yes, he did know who I was.
Right. Now, when you came home, you said that he was over the age of being able to get NDIS help. Is
Yes,
that right?
yeah,
So
he
that
was
made
79.
it difficult. Yes.
He was 79 at the time, and NDIS finishes at about 60, 65. I'm not quite sure exactly what it is. And we then obviously applied for my aged care and were able ultimately over many months to get referrals to various different providers that we took advantage of.
Right. And you ordered, I think you said you ordered over 15 books, sort of trying to read up on what was the best thing to do.
Yeah. In the first week of John being in hospital and having had the stroke, there wasn't very much information coming my way. There was brilliant medical care for the survivor, but very little emotional support for the family members. And I needed to know, I come from a medical research background anyway, and I just needed to know as much as I possibly could. So I ordered 15 books online from the UK, and one of the ones that was really powerful that became our roadmap to recovery was called Stronger After Stroke. And I would show John this front cover, Stronger After Stroke, 3 words, and we stuck with that as our mantra for positive recovery.
Right. So now he had some mobility problems, didn't he? But it was mostly to do with his brain, I suppose, wasn't it?
Mobility was right arm, right leg. There's still sensory loss in both of those, even now, 3 years later. But the sensory loss, his right arm was in fact flaccid after the stroke, so no activity in that at all. And it just hung loosely by his side, so they popped it in a sling. And as soon as they started working on the left side, the brain obviously triggered something and his right arm started to move. So the physios whipped off the sling and started to move with it with great delight, and it's never looked back.
Oh, well, that's wonderful.
It
Yes, yeah, terrific. Now, tell us about the CHAT program, which is the comprehensive, high-dose aphasia treatment developed by Metro North Health in partnership with the University of Queensland Aphasia Research Centre, which forms part of the clinical research services at STARS. You say this is when your journey sort of took a turn for the better. Is that right?
No one really was giving us any real information about aphasia when we were in hospital. It was just a case of trying to get mobility right so that John could handle activities of daily living, ADLs, once he got home, and very little attention was paid towards speech necessarily. So we did the normal public after allied health therapies, and then I was searching around for something to do with aphasia and found the Aphasia Association in Queensland, and then they had a flyer on the CHAT program, which was in its early days of putting it out to the public, and we found them. We did the assessment, were eligible for being able to take part in the research, and we started that in the August. And we walked through the doors of STARS on level 1 into the CHAT program, and absolutely everybody knew about aphasia, not only for the patient but also for the partners and or any family member. And we were totally embraced, and it was amazingly transformational. And John really then felt that he belonged because he met other people with aphasia and he didn't feel so isolated and alone and different.
And what about you? There must have been other carers there as well, so you felt as though you had a little bit of support there too?
Yes, that aspect probably hasn't been as important to me from the point of view of other carers, but the staff who were doing the research were so embracing and so understanding that I probably pulled all my support from them at the time and then went home fully energized and a bit more knowledgeable, and therefore was looking forward to the next session. And we did a lot. We did 50 hours in, I think it was only a few weeks, which is a big dose of information for someone who has an impaired brain, because fatigue is a very real factor in any kind of brain injury.
Right. So now, Bridget, you've obviously got a family and whatever. How have they coped with seeing their father being, robust, playing tennis 1 minute, and then this happening just suddenly out of the blue?
Well, I pretty much became a committee of one, and it's very fatiguing for a person with a brain injury to suddenly be surrounded by a lot of people. So we kept it very low key in the beginning stages, and the family then came and visited in hospital, and they were obviously surprised by the condition that John was in, other than the fact that he was very bright and very positive and very accepting of his condition, which was a huge plus for us. He just was in that body of acceptance and, right, okay, how do we manage this? Couldn't necessarily say that.
Yes.
But his attitude was towards, like, whatever he was asked to undertake, he undertook it at 100%. And I think that's why his optimism prior to the stroke played very much into the optimism of his recovery.
It certainly would, and it would make your job and everybody else's job so much harder if he wasn't optimistic like that.
Yeah,
But,
he was extremely interesting and easy to work with because he was absolutely in there 100% to do anything we asked.
Right. And as you say, you were both very involved in business beforehand, so that just suddenly all had to go. What was your business at that particular time?
We were involved with investment in house and land packages. So we
Right.
sold those to originally investors, and then first home buyers came into the market in a big way with all the grants and things that were available to them. So we did a lot of work with young, probably quite skinny financially, people who we got on board with a wonderful home.
Right.
And that was very exciting because now they got in the market at just the right time, because this was in 2020. We started a new business in 2020 in the middle of COVID, and that's where we started our own business. So we only had 6 months in the business.
Oh, gosh.
And then the stroke came.
Right. So you just had to, as you say, close it all down?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we just finished the contracts we had,
Right.
and then we couldn't do any more.
Yeah.
But the market all changed at that point in time anyway.
Of course.
So, it was quite timely, dare I say. But it was extremely exciting at the time.
Yes. Now, you've made it your goal, really, is to let as many people as know possible about aphasia, haven't you? And the various avenues that you have taken to help John.
Yes.
And you've become, quite well known and a bit of an expert on it.
Well,
right.
I wouldn't necessarily call it an expert, but I certainly am informed. And it's making my life very exciting because we're doing some great advocacy, bringing the word aphasia to people's knowledge because it is simply not known. And today, some of the global stats are 1 in 4 will have a stroke. And of those 1 in 4, 40 to 60% will end up with some form of aphasia. And aphasia is very individual, very different. It can go from very mild to very severe and all that's in between. And it affects people in different ways. So it's not just a one-size-fits-all aphasia word. It actually has all sorts of different parts depending upon where the actual stroke was, what the effect is, where the lesion is, and the lesion is where the injury is, and how confined it is, or whether it's across various different parts of the brain. And an ischemic stroke, which is what John had, which was a blockage in an artery, is very different from a bleed, which is where something has burst or something has had an injury and blood is in the brain, which then creates a volume, which then creates pressure.
Right. Now, you said you had some sort of medical background beforehand. Did that help you, do you think, at all?
Yeah,
or made it worse?
No, it actually helped me because I came from a medical family which was gastroenterological research. And so around the table every day was conversation about anatomy and biology and those kind of things. And I loved biology in my tertiary education. So I came with a lot of understanding of the anatomy of the body, and the brain I'd never touched. So from that point of view, it was all, I was ready to learn, and I just hoed into it and got as much information as possible and made it my journey to educate myself so that I could be as much help as possible in finding the right pathway for treatments that I was observing 24/7 in a lived experience partner.
So what is your everyday life like now? I mean, it obviously has just changed so incredibly, hasn't it?
Yeah. Well, we're extremely busy. I keep John very bubbling along with all the things because he's my gold. He comes along and generally he would demonstrate what aphasia is like.
Yes.
As soon as someone asks him a question, they would realise that he has a challenge with speech. So he's my gold, in a sense, like the lead dog, and he's my guinea pig.
Right.
And we're out there doing experimental work, I guess, in trying to help people understand what aphasia is. And we're a great team. We always have been a great team. We've worked together in business all our lives, so we know one another really, really well. And we've been married now for 53 years. So, we just knew how to handle one another when it came to a challenge like this.
Now, you're listening to Lots to Chat About. I'm Rosemary Peterswald, and my guest today is Bridget Noble, who has devoted the last few years to helping her husband John overcome aphasia as a result of a stroke, and also helping other people who have had the same affliction. Now, tell me about the Arrowsmith program. I sort of believe it involves clocks, is that right?
Yes. Arrowsmith was something that was a neuroplastic online program. One of the books that came in the first 15 was The Woman Who Changed Her Brain, Barbara Arrowsmith Young, and she, in 1975, was a pioneer of neuroplasticity. She grew up in Toronto in Canada, and she had a very painful childhood because lots of things were wrong in her cognitive and her bodily structure. And she had hell at primary school, very difficult time at high school, very difficult time at university. And then towards her latter time of university, when she was 26 or something, she read a book about a guy who'd had a bullet in the Western Front of the war in Europe. And he was describing symptoms that she recognized for herself. And she then started to develop something along the lines of what his psychiatrist was telling him was wrong from the point of view of the injury to his brain. And she'd never thought about that prior, I don't think. So anyway, she developed this program of clocks, which is to do with the relationship of the hands to one another. And
the hands on the clock.
The hands on the clock. And those hands build decision-making. When John's now doing hands on the clock, he started off with no numbers at all, and we did a first face of the clock with only the hours 1 to 12, and he had one single hand on the clock. And that was a new development just in the September when we started in the October in 21 because COVID had forced it online. And so we were glad recipients of being able to do this online at home, which was hugely important to us. And so he started off on that and got his first numbers 1 to 12 in 5 weeks, doing
Yes.
every day. He would do 45 minutes engagement, and every single clock set was 25 clocks. And he had compromised mobility on the right hand, but he had a little keypad, and he would punch the numbers in the keypad and press the enter bar, and they would show up on the screen, and then he would master. The screen would turn into a colourful, competitive brilliance of master, you've mastered it. It's absolutely fantastic. And it was so exciting to see his pleasure from accomplishing something and understanding that the numbers were starting to mean something to him. He couldn't say them, but he started to know what they were meaning on the clock.
Right.
And then he did, in the next 5 weeks, he did 1 to 60,
Yes.
which was obviously the minutes. And then he was given clocks with 2 hands on. So then he had to judge what each hand meant to the other hand on the clock. And so then started the decision-making in the brain, executive decisions, all sorts of management things were happening. It wasn't just learning numbers. There were all sorts of other aspects of cognitive repair that were happening for him in his brain. It was very exciting to see him become sharper and more intuitive and more accurate, and all sorts of wonderful things were happening there. Now he's on 4 hands in the clock. So he punches in 8 numbers.
Yes.
And it's very complex. I'm many times I get it wrong. I'm watching him and I'm going, no, it's not that. And he goes like, yes, it is. And then big green tick comes up on the screen and he goes like,
Oh,
told you so, but he doesn't say told you so.
yeah.
But, you can see that he knows what he knows.
Yes.
Numbers necessarily still don't get spoken, but he knows time of the day now, whereas before he didn't even know anything about time of the day.
Or what day it was.
That's right. Well, he didn't know days of the week or anything. It had all disappeared. So it was a long and exciting journey, and we would absolutely, every single gem of getting something right would be an excitement to celebrate, even just one word. It made us really value life in a whole new way. Very exciting.
Very, very exciting, I would imagine, and very important. Now, what were the 4 big steps to recovery? I mean, I believe you attended a program for aphasia recovery at the Queensland Aphasia Research Centre. So perhaps we can just go back over that a little bit again.
Yes, that was
the
chat.
4 strokes. Yes, that was chat. Isn't it? Yeah.
And chat has now got to the stage where it's being rolled out into other cities for the availability of patients like John. And it's a very exciting program. It needs to be continually funded, and it's so worthwhile funding that particular program. It is a very comprehensive, highly successful program, and people with aphasia are literally transformed in the weeks that they do the program, and they get hope, and they get hope is a big thing that you simply don't get given or offered hope when you've had a stroke, because I think no one wants to take accountability for suggesting that you might recover, because it's all to do with the will of the person. It's all to do with their physical condition. It's all to do with what was the cause of the stroke in the first place. So you can never necessarily say categorically about somebody and what their recovery might be. But, you hear a lot of things where some people have a very small minor issue of health and pass away, and you get other people who've had enormous critical challenges and survive and thrive and, become champions in something in the future. So you can't tell what's going to happen with an individual.
Exactly. So now you do go out and talk to other people about it, don't you? So where can our listeners sort of contact you or go to, listen to you talk about it?
Yeah, well, we've just started with Probus clubs at the moment, Probus club, and that has led to a men's group. And we've just literally stepped aboard that kind of opportunity. We've perfected a sort of little PowerPoint presentation, which is an hour, and it's fully engaging. We've been absolutely amazed how engaged people are. And then when they finish, they want to know what they can do to either prevent having a stroke or learn more about themselves, so that when they go to the doctors, they're more informed and they take more interest in their LDL cholesterol levels. They take more interest in their blood pressure. They take more interest in their diet, their exercise, things that are missing, and obviously water, which is highly important. It's just making sure that you start to take more responsibility and in a more preventive way, rather than like John, if he'd known about all these things afterwards, he may possibly have said, oh, well, I might have changed. But we talk about it a lot in the presentation. Not a lot, but we talk about it, touch on it. And he wouldn't have changed a thing prior to the stroke because he loved his lifestyle.
And that's often the way. But tell me, you mentioned water. How that's
the body,
becoming dehydrated is one of the biggest things.
Yes, the body is 73% water.
Yes.
And the blood flow, of course, is the one that carries the oxygen to all parts of the body. It's not just the brain.
Yes.
But it's very important to stay hydrated, I think.
Particularly as we get older.
Yeah, well, any time if we're doing a lot of physical activity or there's been a breeze and heat and all those kind of things, you don't realise how much moisture is being wicked from your body.
Yes.
And so you just need to be more aware. And if you feel headachy, get some water into you first and then take the other things if you find the water doesn't attend to the headache.
Right. Now, one of the fear with people that have had a stroke, of course, is that they might have another one.
Absolutely.
So how do you and John cope with that? Because it is a fear, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah, it's very real. 40% may have, it's as high as that, 40% may have a stroke.
Yeah.
But I don't want to labour the thought of fear from that point of view. It's more about knowledge, gain education, do what you're asked to do, educate yourself, take your medications regularly. And if you don't have the capability to know whether you've taken the medications, make sure you have some support person who's there to advocate for you to make sure you do take the medication at the right time.
Yeah.
And with aphasia, often enough, people are discharged without necessarily checking that they have real support, because aphasia doesn't just affect speech, it affects thinking.
Yes.
It affects the way you observe things. John can't understand abstract concepts, so he can't start a conversation. He can answer questions, but he can't necessarily start a conversation. So there's a lot still missing. It's coming back, and it may take 6, 7, 8 years, who knows, for him to be fully cognizant as if he was without the stroke. But the genuine, I would say, the genuine uptrend of a stroke is recovery is possible.
Yes. And as you say, you've noticed, a huge difference in the last, 2021 it was when he had the stroke, yes.
Yeah.
And what are we now? Nearly into 2025.
Yeah, so it was February, it'll be 4 years in February.
Yes. But how wonderful, and how lucky for John, I should say, that you have taken the whole thing on so that you can be not only a terrific help to John, but also to so many other people that suffer from the same.
Yeah, let's hope so, because, I've had to learn a lot, and I've been very keen to learn a lot, and we've been involved with a lot of research up and down the eastern seaboard, from Melbourne, South Australia, in fact, as well, South Australia, Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, with different research centres, and we've always been a very accurate and observant couple, because I have the ability to observe really well and articulate, and I come from a medical background.
Yes.
And Johnny's prepared to do all the work. So, we're the ideal research couple, if one could say that, even though I was 73 and John was 79 when he had the stroke. We don't feel as if we're an older person. We still have a lot of capabilities, and we've still got a massively wonderful quality of life to achieve for the next probably 5 or 10 years. Who knows?
Oh, well, that's it's wonderful, but it is your positivity. Is there anything that you would like to say now to somebody who maybe suffered a stroke themselves and has aphasia, or somebody who's coping with that in a loved one?
Yes, I think the first thing is never give up.
Right.
Do a lot of DIY research for yourself. Find groups and people that you can talk to, and obviously tap into your local research universities and things to see if you can find someone who's familiar with stroke in a way that can help you do research programs. Our age group, unfortunately, we have to fund everything. So our research then comes along for us for free, and we can actually do a lot of participation with sort of therapeutic work or therapy work with a free label to it. Whereas if you are with NDIS, you're a much younger age group, and you can actually get support financially.
Right.
So, I think it's a case of have your radar finely tuned and get as much assistance, and keep talking to medical people to begin with. Probably in the research area, I think, is the most helpful, and then you'll find other things from that.
And they can Google you, can't they? If they put Bridget Noble with aphasia there, quite a bit comes up, and there is a little bit of
Hello?
Yes, it does. I think yes, it does. I looked at myself, and there is quite a bit on there about what you've done and what you are doing, which is so terrific. So, thank you, Bridget Noble, for sharing with us your knowledge and positive thoughts. For those 140,000, which I didn't realise there were so many, Australians who have to cope with aphasia. And as I say, to contact Bridget, well, you can contact Reading Radio here in Brisbane, and I will put you in touch. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosemary.
Lovely to have you. And thank you, Paul, for producing.
Thank you. Great friends and great chats. That was another Lots to Chat About with Rosemary Peterswald. Stay tuned next week for another amazing chat.